So we already know that some Republicans are going to support Donald Trump if he fires Robert Mueller. In fact, some of them are encouraging him to do that today. Matt Gaetz said that Mueller should be fired. He's a Republican in Congress. Jim Jordan was on Fox News agreeing with Jeanine Pirro on her insane rant to lock up members of the FBI and imprison people that don't agree with Donald Trump. And so they're ready. They got their nice little crisp shirts that are brown fitted and ready to go. And they're willing to break the law, subvert the law, do whatever it is to protect their leader. So the question is, if Trump does that, he fires more likely Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, so that he'll hire someone else who can fire Robert Mueller. He says he's not going to, but that's what he said before Comey, so I don't believe him at all. I think it's just a matter of if he thinks Mueller's got him, then he'll definitely fire him because he knows that it's really bad. That's what a lot of Republicans don't understand. They think, why is Trump going through all this stuff? Man, he's got really thin skin. No, there's a much easier explanation. It's because he did it. That's why he's saying, man, if you knew what I knew, you try to fire Mueller too. So the question is, what will the rest of the Republicans do? First layer of the question is, will the Democrats have enough backbone to actually go to impeachment if Donald Trump fires his own investigator? Well, we've got a petition up on that, tytnetwork.com/obstruction. It says if Donald Trump fires Mueller, he should be impeached for obstruction of justice. So very easy, very obvious. Every Democrat in the country should agree to that. My guess is a lot of them won't because they never fight. And then we're gonna need, on top of every Democrat, some Republicans to break away and go, we have to have the rule of law. And if these guys aren't gonna follow the Constitution, we're not gonna have an America left. Will they do that? Well, like I said, so far, some of the signs are really bad with guys like Jordan and Gaetz looking to do purges of the FBI and eliminate what they view to be their opponents. On the other hand, there are some more cautious notes. GOP Senator Lankford said, obviously, I don't think it taints the entire process, referring to the so-called controversy about the transition emails, which the Mueller team had every legal right to get. It's a made-up nonsense controversy. And he says it doesn't taint the whole process, meaning no, you don't have to fire Mueller. And then John Cornyn, a very important Republican leader in the Senate, was on television this weekend. Let's see what he had to say.
I have a lot of admiration and respect for Director Mueller, but I would think he would want to eliminate challenges to the integrity of his investigation by eliminating agents who have taken positions either in text messages or through their political activity. The appearance of justice needs to be done, and I think these conflicts of interest jeopardize the integrity of his investigation.
So the text messages he's referring to is from two agents who already were asked to leave the investigation the minute that Mueller found out about those text messages. By the way, those text messages were anti-Donald Trump, definitely. They were pre-election, but they also had some messages that were against Hillary Clinton and definitely against Bernie Sanders. So apparently those agents didn't like anybody in politics. But they're not part of the investigation, so it should be an issue. But is Cornyn going to use it as an excuse? Well, Stephanopoulos is going to follow up by asking him about that.
The FBI agent who was engaged in those text messages, both of them have been taken off the investigation. They were taken off apparently as soon as Special Counsel Mueller found out about them.
And I commend him for that. He should. And but there are others who he needs to make sure he vets that team.
Yeah, I think he did vet the team and then said they're not on the team anymore as soon as he found out about the text messages. Okay, so by the way, should we also take off all the FBI agents who are pro-Trump from the investigation? Because you might have to eliminate a lot of them, because according to most people that worked at the FBI that have spoken to the press, huge majorities of the FBI voted for Trump and are Republicans. Okay, and then at the end though, this is the most important part. Should Donald Trump fire Mueller? If Cornyn says yes, that is a sign of Republican leadership going, do whatever you have to do, fire anyone you got to, don't worry about the rule of law. So this is going to be vital. Let's see what he says.
It appears that some of the president's allies in the Congress are starting to lay the groundwork for him to fire Robert Mueller. What would that mean if the president fired the special counsel?
Well, I've read that the president's own lawyer says that's not going to happen. I think that would be a mistake myself.
Okay, look, you never know. He might change his mind later, and Republicans have been known to do that. But for the moment being, he said that would be a mistake. That's really good. So for the moment being, Republican leadership in the Senate telling Trump, we will not have your back if you go above the law. If you break the law and then fire the people investigating you, it would be a mistake. Let's hope that they stick with that position so that there's accountability in this country and that the Constitution still stands. What you just watched was one of the videos that we do today, but we actually do a whole 2-hour show every single day. It's a podcast. You could watch it in video or listen to it as audio. You can download it, you can stream it, and you get it completely ad-free if you could become a member of the Young Turks. TYTnetwork.com/join.